Hello and welcome to this episode of People Are Animals Too, Darn It. I'm your host, Mandy Evans, and today I'm joined by an extra special person, Melanie Sadek, who runs Valley Humane Society in California. And what makes Melanie so extra special is that she is my identical twin sister. So I recommend that anybody that might be tuning in via I guess just audio, Stitcher and iTunes, you may want to go watch this on YouTube so you know who the heck is talking. Welcome, Melanie.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So today, I think there's something that you and I are both pretty passionate about and thought it would be fun to have a discussion around is you kind of refer it to it this way as branding, and I refer to it as like how we just do our general communications to our public. So before we dive into that, why don't you tell everybody about yourself and your organization?
So I'm the executive director at Valley Humane Society in Pleasanton, California. I've been there for 9 years, just hit 9 years. And I'm also the vice president of the board of directors for the California Animal Welfare Association. And so I have the opportunity of working with lots of shelters and organizations throughout the state. My organization is private, so I do have some advantages as far as kind of messaging that goes out to the public. And I know private shelters or public shelters have way more challenges when it comes to branding and culture. But being a part of Cal Animals has given me the opportunity to learn so much from all these different organizations, not just what's working for them, but all the obstacles that they face. And so it's probably made me even more determined to help people with their kind of branding and culture. So I'm excited to talk about this today.
Great. So when we say branding, why don't you give a definition of what you mean by that?
So I think a lot of people think that your brand is your logo because, you know, you go through a whole rebranding, and of course you do that and you get a new logo. But brand is really a feeling. It's how people feel about your organization. It's everything that you do all mashed into one feeling. And so this includes how your employees feel about you, how your customers will feel, your adopters, if you're doing any enforcement. And so brand is a feeling. And I think one exercise that I've seen people do that's kind of exciting is pop up some brands like the Tiffany logo and ask people, how do you feel when you see this, or Nordstrom or Facebook? And then you get an idea of kind of what it means to have a brand, a public image. So that's what it is for me.
When I see a Tiffany logo, I immediately feel inferior and jealous.
I don't think that's the brand they're going for.
I don't know. I think that maybe it's the opposite of that feeling.
That's a good point, though, because one thing with your brand is that you can't really control how people feel about your organization. You can just influence them, and different people in your community will feel different things. And so if you just go into someone's house, if you're a public agency and you take animals out of a hoarder's home, how they feel about your brand is going to be very different than the family that came in and just adopted their new best friend. And so you can't make everybody feel and think the same thing about your organization, but you can try to align everyone around a common idea of what they want, what you want them to feel. So yes, I look at Tiffany and think of simplicity and quality and very expensive. Maybe out of reach.
So I think that what you're talking about is really important because we're all in some ways in a reactive mode every single day. We're just trying to get we're trying to help animals, and we're in this almost on a hamster wheel of trying to accomplish the goals. And many people don't have large budgets where they have great marketing communications people or, dedicated staff that would be focused on this. And then because of that, we miss it. We don't even realize that there's power in how we communicate with people because we're just caught up in the day-to-day. So can you outline some of the areas that you see as opportunities to be able to control the brand and messaging?
Well, I think it kind of starts, it really does start with the leader of the organization. And that can be a little bit of a challenge if you're not the leader, because influencing how people feel about your organization, if you don't have the leaders buy-in, is definitely hard, almost impossible. But it can be some of the smallest little changes. It could be talking about, with your team, how do you want people to feel? And maybe turning it around on yourself. Like, how do you feel? Like, how do you want to feel when you walk into a shelter? Do you want to feel judged? Do you want to feel listened to? Do you want to feel sad? And so once you can kind of identify how ideally you want people to feel, you can start to come across or develop values. Like, I want people to trust my organization. So one of my values might be trust, or, I want to make sure that we're seen as an organization of integrity. So integrity might be a value, and then measure, who am I living up to those values? Do I feel like my community trusts me? Do I feel like, I'm being transparent? Transparency might be one. And so when you can come up with those kind of key values, then you can start to evaluate everything in your organization. And it doesn't have to be a big process or expensive. I mean, honestly, if you really want to do this right, you hire a third party. They come in, they ask everybody how they feel. It's very confidential. No one gets their feelings hurt. This can be a raw process, especially for leadership if they've been in place for a long time and now they're hearing how people feel and they don't like what they're hearing. But I mean, just the smallest changes can make the biggest difference. So, do you greet people when they walk in the door? Do you question them and make them feel interrogated, or do you support kind of where they're coming from? Even if you really don't agree with them, can you show them support? Most people don't want to talk to you if they feel like you're attacking them. They'll be much more open and honest if they feel supported. And so there are little changes that can really make a big difference. But it does kind of start at the leadership level. So hopefully anyone who's tackling this can get leadership on board.
So one of the areas that I think we can sometimes miss, and it's not on purpose, is the way that we communicate our animals for adoption. So when we had something happen, this was a few years back now, where one of our team members wrote a description about an animal and put in there that the owner, they disparaged the previous owner because the owner didn't commit. There was some medical challenges around this pet, and that they tossed them aside, like they were they weren't committed to the animal. And they did not realize that when they did that the person who had surrendered the pet was one of our donors. And the donor called me and was really devastated because the amount of time that they had dedicated to trying to make the situation work was pretty extensive, and that they had to make a decision that was not only better for the pet, but also for their animals at their home. And it really brought to light, and the person that did the description wasn't trying to be bad. They weren't trying to do anything. It was, they were doing what they thought was best, and that would be the best depiction of the animal. And so I think that when we look at who we are as an organization, we really have to pay attention to the way we communicate all aspects of our work.
You know, I think you bring up a really good point, because our industry has been so focused for so long on creating the person as the bad guy, right? There's always a bad guy, and we're just so focused on fundraising around the bad guy or making up the backstories. That's a pet peeve of mine. Is, you know, a dog comes in and they have what looks like potentially a burn or a chemical burn, and we have no idea how that dog got hurt, but everyone can't wait to make up all the terrible stories about where that animal came from and who hurt them. And so when we do that, then what we're doing is we're constantly making people the bad guy, when people, the majority of people, are the good guys. You know, we are all people, and it takes people to help these animals. And so, you know, in general, I just think that that's a question that people need to ask when they're thinking about their brand. Is, do you need to find the bad guy? And unfortunately for public shelters, when it comes to rescues, oftentimes the bad guy is the public shelter. And so for public shelters, sometimes the bad guy is the person that surrendered the animal or did whatever. And so, you know, if we want to turn our industry around and be hopeful and positive, then we need to stop. We need to really take some notes about how we communicate and how we talk about people. Because I think it really is just hurting us. And you know this, who's the #1 group that goes after animal welfare professionals? Animal welfare professionals. It's not the public that's attacking animal welfare. It's people within our own industry. It's just a nasty cycle of negativity that really doesn't benefit the industry at all. And so I think, again, asking ourselves, you know, who are our customers and how do we want them to feel can really bring a lot of stuff to light and help you make good decisions about how you want to change the way you communicate as an organization.
Yeah, and I think that what you're talking about is really keeping your internal bias in check and paying attention to kind of the false narrative that our brains create. I mean, we're judgmental as you know, humans are judgmental, and we have to be, because that's how we survive. So every situation we're put in, we have to make a quick judgment, and it's really having and honing the skill of recognizing, wait, is what I'm thinking reality, or am I making this up? And we see that in a different way than I think that you guys do, because you're private, but you don't take in strays. And we are private with municipal contracts, and we take in strays. And what we find is a lot of the public that comes to us with a stray comes with this really extravagant story of, you know, they saved this animal who was tossed out of a car. And then we talk to them about that story, and we do it in a really respectful way. Like, oh my gosh, like, they tossed the dog out of the car. Did you see them? Like, where were they? And they're like, no, we didn't see them. The dog was on the side of the road. I'm like, okay, so mark that box that was an internal narrative. Like, I don't blame them, because they've created it. But what happens is, if you don't take the time in the process to go through that, you create your decision-making around something that isn't even real. And I think that when we look at wanting to be optimistic and positive and really put out that messaging, a lot of it has to be very purposeful. Like, it has to be that when you get a cat that's been shot with a BB gun, do you have to share that detail? What is it that adds value by sharing that detail? Yes, if you're an agency that's trying to track down the culprit who did it, that's different than saying this animal has been through surgery and now it's ready for adoption. Having to make somebody the bad guy isn't necessarily necessary, and it really does kind of create the way that the community views you.
Well, I think it was Pet Health. I could be wrong, but I believe Pet Health did a survey of adopters, and they did some storytelling and asked people to comment on which animal, based on which story, they would be more likely and more interested in adopting. And they actually found that the more positive stories about the animal attracted more adopters. And so I think in our industry, we tend to think that the sadder the story is and the more the animal has suffered, the more interest we'll get on the animal. And this survey actually found that it was totally different. People wanted to hear, you know, positive messaging. They wanted to know that they weren't bringing a broken animal into their home. And so it's just, again, getting out of our brains so that we can make, you know, more positive decisions. I think in general, we've kind of gotten into this negative place, right? I mean, sorry, but our world is very negative right now. But people are attracted to positive stuff. People want to go somewhere where they feel welcome. They want to be happy. And even during COVID, one of the things we've done for marketing is just shared happy stories. We don't want to be a reason for any more sadness. There's already enough sadness. There's already enough frustration. But if we can be an avenue of happiness, create funny projects for people via social media, like what's your favorite animal related movie? Let's talk about it. Or how's your, you know, what's your animal coworker look like today? And people are attracted to that kind of stuff. It builds more of a relationship with our donor versus people who post more reactionary type stuff. Doesn't build relationships. It's more transactional. It's like, oh, I need to help. I need to do this. And I think that people don't necessarily understand that there's fatigue in all of this. So, you know, even look at the fires in California. You know, when the fires are happening, everyone's donating money. Well, after 5 months of fires, all those donations start to dry up because, sorry, we do not handle prolonged issues. Like, look at COVID. In the beginning, everyone was sheltering in place. Everyone was going to do what needed to be done. And now Americans are just sick of it. They're just done. They're done doing that. And so people need to know that when they are supporting a cause for you, that it ended in positive outcomes, not more misery. I know Sarah McLachlan, the commercial for HSUS, in the beginning it raised so much money, but now you ask people, they just change the channel. It's just doom and gloom, and they don't even know if their money helped. It's just doom and gloom. So being positive, it's a much, in my opinion, a much better way to live and to run an organization, and it attracts more positive, focused people to your organization.
And we know that burnout is a huge discussion. It's a big discussion in veterinary medicine. It's a big discussion in animal welfare. But one of the aspects of that it's an interesting thing, because you hear counselors provide feedback and counseling and consulting to shelters around how to cope. How do you cope with burnout, and how do you survive and move on from it? But realistically, what you're saying is so true, that if you can change the way that you form your narrative around what's happening, that alone will ease burnout. And donors, if you're constantly saying, oh, this animal was, abused, and this one was dumped, and this, all you're doing is almost fighting against a problem that eventually that donor's probably going to get tired of, right? Because they don't see that it never ends. Like, it just is constant. All these animals are being tortured and abandoned and neglected and abused. When you switch to a more optimistic narrative, what you're doing is you're taking your donors on a journey with you, that they're on this journey of helping and supporting animals, and they see their work, and it's happening, and they're able to save an animal that may have just needed some medical care. They don't know why it needed medical care. And it's that optimism, and like you said, it's attractive, and it starts to build, and all of a sudden you have more donors because they're not falling off because they're getting tired of the work. They feel impacted. They feel like they're making a difference.
Yeah, I think one of the things people should be aware of too is and you and I know this, but we went in with this kind of view when we went into our organizations. And I think both of us experienced some turnover within the first year of our organizations. And so when you try to change your culture, you're going to get pushback within your own team because they're just not used to it. And so we just had a situation recently. You know, you're never set. You never just do it and then everything stays the same, because the way that we think about animals is so kind of ingrained in us that we can't. There's so many people who cannot help but come up with the backstory. So we have a Facebook that's just for our fosters, and one of our employees wrote in, one of our fosters wrote about a German Shepherd puppy and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm just so sad that we need to find a home for this 2-year-old German Shepherd dog. This breed is so bonded to its people. I can only imagine, what kind of terrible people had this dog before." And so then one of my employees chimes in on this Facebook page and says, "Oh, I know, it's so sad." And so, you don't want to be the jerk that chimes in and says, you are making up backstories. You are doing all the stuff we don't stand for. And so I just wrote in and said, always better for us to not imagine where she was, but where she's going. And let's focus on knowing that we're going to provide her with the best outcome possible, and that her future is very bright with us. And that changed the whole narrative of that entire story. Everyone wrote in and said, "Oh my gosh, I can't wait for her to get adopted," or "Oh, let me foster her." And so it's, that's why leadership is so important, because you have to constantly be reminding everybody. And you still need to allow people to get stuff out, right? You need to allow people to feel disappointed. But when you see your own team react, you're just so proud. Like, we had this adopter come in on Saturday night. She was so upset. Right now, emotions are really, really high. Maybe I'm sure they're high everywhere, but people are really frustrated. They're having a really hard time finding animals. They're having a hard time getting groups to call them back. And we had this one young woman come in Saturday night, and she was very upset because she couldn't get the kitten that she wanted. It had already been adopted. And she had a full-on meltdown, freaking out. Who do you need to call? Who do you need to call to change this? And it's like, well, I'm sorry, but the cat's been adopted. Like, there's nothing else we can do. But then when we had our manager's call, and the manager was kind of talking about what had happened, it just struck me like how awesome the way that our manager handled the situation, because she said to us on the call, "I understand where she's coming from. I actually feel bad for her. Here this woman's yelling at her, and instead of like being mad at this woman, she just said, I understand where she's coming from, and I want to help her." And so I sent her an email that night with additional kittens that were going to be available over the next few days. And I've been trying to communicate with her so that I can help her, because I understand where she's coming from. And it's like, God, what a nice positive way of looking at something that was uncomfortable and turning it around and understanding human emotion and still trying to do the best for this person. So I'm proud of that outcome.
Yeah, it's seeking the positive intentions of others. I think that that's something that is a good practice. I had Molly, my little paraplegic pug. And one of the things that really struck me back then was when we would be in the park and she was walking in her wheelchair, people would say, "That's ridiculous. You need to euthanize that dog." And I just remember really being upset that people would, number one, even say that to me, like I was doing something wrong, but more so that they viewed her life as less than because it was different. And what I started to do in practice was, when I saw, let's say, a kid screaming at their mom, and normally I'd be like, "Whatever, mom, you need to step up," and blah, blah, blah. I would think about it and think, that child could be autistic, and the mom is doing the best that she can. And when you start to kind of try to just change your inner voice, things become, it's kind of cool. I mean, there are always times when you have to go back and say, okay, wait, no, that person has got something wrong. Like, let's just be honest. But what I have found is that that's far less often than, and like people tailgating me. Like, okay, there could be some reason this person could be really, you know, like in an urgent situation. Like there's always some reason. And it became more so when I started working here, because I kept thinking, don't you feel bad that you guys feel bad that you came up with a story and you've been ripping on this person for the last hour, and they show up and you find out that they're battling cancer and that they had no idea their dog got out, but you've just been, you know, dishing on them for the last hour. And it's like, well, why go there? Why feel bad? Why not just assume that there's good in people? I wanted to tell you, I'm not sure if we've talked about it before, but UC Davis did a study on negative and positive. And they said to two different groups of people that one of them, they said, you have a rare disease and you have a 30% chance of surviving. And then the other group, they said, you have a rare disease, you have a 70% chance of dying. And the people that they shared the negative with first, it didn't matter what they said after that, they couldn't get out of the negative perspective. But the people that started with the positive, once they introduced the negative, couldn't get out of the negative. So, and they had a positive view. Like when they shared the positive point of view, they actually felt good. They felt hopeful. They had a positive view. And then once the negative, they couldn't. So when we give feedback to our coworkers, when we are working with our population, our adopters, our donors, just keeping in mind that the minute that you introduce negativity, you can't really recall it. So it's better to be focused on the positive.
Agreed.
Okay, so I can't remember now if we talked about Facebook, because Facebook is probably the #1 perpetuator of image in our communities these days. And I just had a call with a great group out of Montana that had an unfortunate incident happen on their Facebook page. And they just said, you know, we put it out there, but we don't have the resources to manage our page. And really things got out of hand. And so, and they were reaching out because they were going to be making some changes. So how do you work with your team to help communicate your messaging through Facebook?
So, you know that we were brutally killed through kind of a slander campaign a few years ago. It was on Good Morning America Online, Inside Edition, all this crazy stuff. And they primarily utilized social media to attack us. And literally we had hate messages from all over the world. And we just brought in a sheltie into our facility from a public shelter, and did everything possible to help this dog. The dog was with us for 6 weeks before it was adopted, or maybe 4 weeks before it was adopted. The owners figured out after 6 weeks that they needed to call the public shelter. So they had never called, and then they found out that we had the dog, and they launched a campaign suggesting that we had an underground railroad for purebreds coming into our facility, which is not true. You know, the big money, the big $150 we got for that adoption. But it taught me a lot about crisis management and social media. And so what's very important, I think, is you do not have a social media page if you cannot manage it. That is any social media. If you have social media, you have to be able to manage it. And that means more than one person. And so I know for you, you're always watching your social media pages. I'm watching my social media pages. You and I don't manage those pages, but we always have eyes on them to make sure that if our team isn't looking, somebody is always kind of seeing what's happening. Because we're a private group, we have opportunities to control our message that are, well, better than public shelters. Public shelters with the freedom of information, there's limits on how they can control what they put out there. But for us, what we did specifically around the Home to Home program is that we needed to create a Facebook page that wasn't going to allow people to be hurtful or negative. That, you know, for us to really focus on the animal is really the client when we talk about home to home. And so we don't care if, you know, think about it. You can judge the owner as much as you want, but if the animal's not in a good place, how is judging the owner going to help the animal? All we need to do is find a home for the animal. That is going to help the animal find a better place. So we created a boilerplate that pretty much said that, you know, we've removed a post that is hurtful or harmful. And even though we may not agree with the reasons for why somebody's rehoming, we want to focus on how we help the animal. And we started to roll these policies out in advance of rolling out the program. So we kind of set the stage. Hey, this is what it means to interact with us. And we laid it out so that people knew that we might delete their posts. And I should tell you, we delete their posts. We don't hide them. You know, when you hide a post, that person's network can still see their negative comments. And so we did these kind of, you know, outward messages. We're not going to accept this anymore. And then we started to do this boilerplate whenever something, and not just for home to home, but anytime somebody wrote something that we didn't think lived our values on that site. And so we would remove a post, we'd put the boilerplate up, and then we would take that poster's name and we'd put it into a separate folder that we could all look at so that we could keep track of, you know, we called it the shamers. And so what we started to see is that when we stopped creating a platform for negativity, the people stopped being negative. They didn't start writing back and saying, you guys suck, you keep deleting my comments. They would just stop being negative. And so it's this idea that if you're going to create and allow people to be nasty, you're giving those people an avenue to be nasty. And unfortunately, some people can't communicate any other way if they're being allowed to. And so by removing the opportunity, our entire Facebook platform became very positive. The one thing, if you don't want negativity on your social media, you can't create negativity. So, you know, again, stuff we already talked about, we don't make up backstories. If an animal came out of a hoarder's home, we probably won't share that it came out of a hoarder's home. There's just no reason for people to know this information. We just talk about that we have these great animals that need a new home. So with public shelters that are working as government entities, it's so much more difficult. But I was thinking about this morning because I was just talking to a public shelter who's going through a lot of conflict, like trying to figure out how to get social media to work for them. And all I can say is that everyone who's doing it well from the government side had to bust their butt to get permission to do it well. They had to be lobbyists for what they wanted. And so don't give up on, you know, what you're trying to do. You just have to be persistent, even if it's baby steps. But you guys can get out there and share your positive work. Let people know that the only job you do is not euthanizing animals, that you're taking FBI training so that you can investigate animal cruelty. You're getting people reunited with their pets. You know, you're putting away people who have mistreated animals. You're getting hoarders the help that they need and finding new homes. I mean, there's so much good work being done in the industry, and unfortunately, no one really wants to talk about it. They only want to talk about the bad stuff. So anyway, that was a very long answer to that question, but I think social media is a great opportunity. It's scary, but it's a great opportunity.
So before we wrap up, let's talk about how you communicate your work to support donations from from donors, because there is a lot of potential negativity that is shared to try to solicit the almighty dollar. So I think it's Best Friends that did an amazing amount of work on trying to only share positive stories. But have you seen any shift at your organization from being more positive focused and what that means for your donors?
I have to say that if it is Best Friends, I'm going to be surprised, because the way they use the word kill over and over again to get money is not very helpful for our industry. But anyway, for Valley Humane Society, we communicate in different ways to different donors. And so we know through our direct mail pieces, these tend to be people who want to hear animal-related stories specifically, so we keep it very animal-focused. We do not put anything out that is like untrue. So we don't talk about picking animals up off the street, because we don't pick up animals off the street. For our big fundraising events like our galas, we found that at the gala, the people that are coming in are very much interested in the human-animal bond. So we really highlight how we're making an impact in that human-animal bond. And we don't do sad stuff. So I don't get up at the gala and talk about miserable stuff. Like I don't ever want to go back to an event that has made me feel terrible. So I want to make sure that people know that, yeah, sometimes something is uncomfortable, but we're fighting to make sure that that uncomfortable doesn't have to happen again. And so even in our social media, everything we do, it's always with like, how can people genuinely make a difference? How can they help? Not, give us money because we picked up a dog that appears to have been burned by acid. How does that help? Like they want to be part of the solution, not a part of the problem. So we don't do that. But we do cater our messaging depending on the audience that we're reaching out to.
Is there any other aspect we haven't talked about?
I think the only thing that I want to add is, allow yourself and your team to play the blame game a little bit when you need to. But for the most part, be careful that like I'm surrounded by these giant animal welfare organizations that have a lot more money than me. And there are times that they get media attention on stuff that we're doing. And sometimes it's like, well, shoot, why do the big guys always get the attention and I'm not getting the attention? So I can get a little bit caught in that, but I think that overall for your own brand and culture, you don't want to play the victim, and you don't want to elevate yourself by putting down others. And so when I see something like that, I allow myself to have that moment of like frustration. And then I say to myself, they're doing something better than I'm doing. What could I be doing better? There's no reason that I can't get media attention on this. Did I try? Probably not. And so I'm always trying to reverse the narrative to make sure that I'm focused on the fact that I can't blame everyone. And I used to own a store in our community. And I can tell you, this is a normal human reaction. When business is down, we blame the customers. Well, is it really the customer's fault that business is down? What can I be doing to get people to come in and shop in my store? And so once you blame somebody for a problem you're facing, you almost give yourself permission to just be a victim versus jumping up and dealing with the problem. And so you can't really have a good brand, in my opinion. It's hard for people to look at you in a super positive way if you're playing the victim.
Okay, so this is such a hot topic for me because one, I think what you're saying is that you have to be authentic, and your team, especially if you're changing your culture, they're going to have feelings about this, and that there should be some safe place where people can be authentic, whether that's within your management team or there's like a buddy that someone can talk to, because It's the only way we're going to grow. You can't say that I'm going to grow by just saying, I'm going to pretend that everything going on is okay and I'm comfortable with it. It doesn't work that way. You won't grow. And then by what happens, and I won't go into detail about it, but there hasn't been that long ago that I went into full victim mode because I didn't feel like I was being as supported as I wanted to be. And I had to almost enter into it in order to get out of it. Because I think I had to just own the fact that, yes, I'm feeling really sad about what's happening right now. But what happens is if you get comfortable, and a lot of people get comfortable in that mode, because it's easier, right? Because I can just be like, no one wants to volunteer at my shelter because people suck. Okay, well, I can fall back on that forever. There's only one person that can change that, and that is myself and the team by empowering us to be able to change it. We can't control anyone else's behavior. We can only control what we do and the output that we have. So you saying, what could we have done differently is a really big question to ask yourself so that you can put yourself back in an empowerment role to make a difference. So anytime anyone is feeling like they're in that victim role, and I can say just from your example, that one way of looking at that is that there are a lot of organizations out there that have a lot more resources than we do. And they have teams of people that are able to do work that we can't do. And it is a struggle for me because I'm like this big picture person and I've got all these ideas and I want to make a difference and I'm striving to make a difference, but my team isn't big enough and my funding isn't big enough to support that. And that feels really bad. But then I know that I just have to keep pushing forward and pushing forward and pushing forward and doing the things we're doing. So it's just, yeah, you can't get anywhere if you don't empower yourself to be able to make a change. Sorry, I had to jump on that. I was going to say I had to jump on that cereal box, but I don't think that's the same.
That is
soapbox.
Soapbox.
I
don't know how many cereal boxes you're going through, but that would just fall on the ground and collapse.
Yeah, I'm not putting myself up on a very high pedestal with my cereal box. I know that you and I could talk about this stuff all day, and I'm sure that we will revisit other topics in the future, but people generally like a good 45-minute podcast. So I think it's a good time for us to wrap up. So this has all been really great information, and there are going to be people who kind of want to dive into this a little bit more. And I know that you are doing a presentation with Cal Animals. So that is usually available on their website at calanimalsorg. And they actually have a lot of webinars and great information that are available on that site. Are there any other resources, books, webinars, podcasts that you've been listening to that you want to recommend that people dive into to learn more?
I think one of the things I would recommend is look within your own community. Look at your police department, look at your public health department, and see kind of see what they're doing with their social media outreach. There's a big conversation right now around authoritative kind of organizations moving to more community-minded organizations. And that is probably something that's going to happen over time because people just, they're not into this authoritative anymore. But talking to police departments and figuring out how they've made changes can be so instrumental in figuring out how to make your own changes. I don't have any direct resources, though I would encourage people to take some of the webinars on the DEI, because it also can help you better understand what that community is feeling when they come into your organization, and help you decide kind of who you're really helping and who your client is. But other than that, I'm always willing to help people. I love this topic. It's one of my favorites. So people can always reach out if they wanted any info.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Melanie, for joining me today, for following in my footsteps and becoming an executive director at a shelter. Just had to throw that in there. It's been fun, and hopefully we'll do it again.
Thanks for having me.